name's Eric Valentine. I've started a company called Undertone Audio. It's really about these custom consoles that we're making. It was a project that I started about 5 years ago. I had reached a point where I realized that the consoles that I owned were either too old and worn out to keep working or didn't have the features that I wanted, and decided to go down the crazy path of building my own custom console. And ultimately, we were so pleased with the way it came out, and so many people had reacted positively to, what we were talking about along the way. It seemed like it might make sense to actually make it available to other people. We've built 3 consoles so far. This is the 3rd one. The first 2 are installed in my studio in Los Angeles, a place called Barefoot Recording. And, we're ecstatic about how they came out. I've been using them for, most of this year, and I couldn't be happier. I finally have the console I'm going to use for the rest of my life. So let's talk about what it does. So the first thing that was a big problem for me with all the other consoles that I've worked on is that when you have a hard metal surface sitting right below your near-field monitors, you get this horrible reflection right off the face of the console. And because of the timing delay of the sound reflecting off of there versus the sound coming directly from the speaker, it causes comb filtering in the sort of high mid-range. The area from 1K to 5K just gets completely destroyed, and it's something that has bothered me for years and years. And so when I decided to make my own console, I was determined to come up with a solution for that. And the inspiration came from an old AKG mic that I have that has this weird porous metal used as a windscreen. And so we started to think, if you can sing through this and still hear enough of the sound coming through, it must not be reflecting very much of it. And so we tracked down some of the material and did some tests, and it turned out that that really is going on. When you put this stuff below a speaker, it's really like there's nothing there at all. It's like the speaker is just standing on a stand with nothing there. The other problem that I've had with consoles is that you got a whole bunch of channels in front of you. There's like 60 channels sitting there, but the EQs really aren't flexible enough to be the best choice at least 90% of the time. And so with this EQ, I was determined to make it so like whatever you run into, you will be able to fight your way out of it with this EQ for sure. It is incredibly flexible, incredibly powerful. So it's a basic 4-band parametric EQ with 2 filters, a low pass and a high pass. So the entire EQ is bypassable with this button. And then every other individual stage of the EQ is individually bypassable. And when you bypass those individual stages, it completely removes it from the circuit. So, like in this case, the only thing I really wanted to do on here was just boost a little bit of high end on this kick drum. So I only have that band turned on, and I don't get any of the noise that would be introduced by these other bands being in the circuit and not actually doing anything that I need to be done. So then the high and low pass filters have your usual frequency selection. This goes from 340 hertz all the way down to 20 hertz for your high pass filter. But we added a Q control. So from the fully counterclockwise position, it's about 16 dB per octave, a very gentle roll off of the low end. As you start turning it up, the slope gets steeper and steeper. At the 12 o'clock position, it's roughly about 18 dB per octave. And then beyond that, it starts to actually create a peak at the frequency selection. So you can add a boost, at the frequency that you selected. And it's really cool for like shifting the energy from one area to another. So it ends up sort of taking all of the energy below, let's say 70 hertz, and pushing it all up into the 70 hertz range. It just lops off below that, and then you get it focused more around 70 hertz. And for me, it's been really great for like kick drums and stuff like that. It's just a really punchy, very focused low-end boost, for that kind of stuff. So then the EQ, the parametric bands of the EQ are very unique. Instead of having a switch where you can switch between peak or shelf shape, we ended up putting this knob on here that blends between the peak and shelf shape. So when you're all the way counterclockwise, it's a pure peak shape. As you start turning it clockwise, you start to bring in the shelf shape. So in this case, everything above 4.4K would start to come up. And then by the time you get to 12 o'clock, then it's more like a conventional shelf shape where it just comes up to 4.4K and it stays up there. When you go past 12 o'clock position, it starts to change the slope and the contour of the shelf. And so it makes it so you can emulate the slope and the character of just about any other shelf EQ ever made. I've been able to duplicate the curve of a Pultec or an API or a Neve or any of the other favorite EQs that I have. And so, ultimately, if somebody buys one of these things, we're going to have presets so you can just call up, oh, I want a shelf that sounds like a 550A, and you can just set the knobs that way, and there you go. The other thing, we have a Q control here, and that stays active all the time. So this is the broadest. It's a very broad Q at 0.3. It goes all the way up to a Q of 10. It's really, really razor sharp for very, very specific adjustment of a very, very narrow bandwidth. And then the Q control stays active whether you're in the peak shape or the shelf shape. And when you're in the shelf shape, you get some really wild, crazy undershoot and all kinds of weird effects that happen for doing really extreme EQ effects. And then we have this other mode. It's a notch mode. And actually, I should mention this. All the gain control is switchable. So you have a boost mode, and then the letter C is for a cut mode, and that makes it so the entire 300 degrees of rotation of the gain control knob is used for one or the other, and so it effectively doubles the resolution of the gain adjustment, and you can make very fine gain adjustments with the EQ bands instead of having a detent at 12 o'clock, and then you only have 150 degrees this way for your cut and 150 degrees for boost that way. And then we have this notch mode where at the halfway point, it will completely cancel out whatever frequency that you have selected at whatever shape you have selected. So if you're in a peak shape, it will cancel out whatever width that you have of a frequency selected. And then if you go into a shelf shape, it actually turns this band more into like a high or low pass filter. So it will cancel out everything above a particular point or below a particular point if you do it here. And then we have this other thing where if you turn the gain all the way up, then it goes into like a phase adjustment mode where basically what's happening is whatever shape you have selected at whatever frequency, that slice of the frequency spectrum gets phase reversed 180 degrees. And so you can take, in this case, we'll set it to a peak, relatively narrow, let's say like at 1.5K. So that means that 1.5K has now been phase reversed, and the adjacent frequencies are adjusted in phase based on the width of the Q setting. And so it makes it so you can do variable phase adjustments on something. And so, it's been handy for me when I'm trying to get the DI of a bass to match up properly with the actual amplified version of it. Or if somebody is miking a drum kit and they don't get the spacing quite right on their overheads and the snare drum is like 90 degrees out of phase, you can make that 90-degree adjustment sort of in the low-mid range and get it so it forces it to be totally in phase one way or out of phase the other way instead of being two shades of kind of out of phase. We also have a very special path for the mix bus. The final output stage for the mix bus is all tube circuitry and helps give the console a really beautifully open, very relaxing, very detailed sound. And the control room monitor also has a vacuum tube output stage, and it just helps the whole thing just be very comfortable to listen to. It's just between the acoustic transparency and the tube final stages, I've been able to just mix longer and have less ear fatigue. It's been really, really great.
Is there a sound that you were kind of going after when sort of other favorite consoles that also like touch tones?
Sure, yeah. My preference was definitely, the era of late 60s and early 70s, that type of circuit design, and I just didn't feel like anybody was really sort of like taking that design approach to the next level, And so all of the circuitry in this console is all Class A single-ended gain stages, input to output. No chips, no monolithic op amps anywhere in it. No Class A/B push-pull, no crossover distortion. Really beautiful, very musical sound, very similar to like a classic Neve, or my favorite of that era was the old EMI TGI console. And this is probably more similar to that because there's no interstage transformers. The Neves have a lot of transformers in them, and so you hear a lot of the sound of the transformers in that console. This one is more like the EMI console, where there's just an input transformer and an output transformer.